Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is Fran Griffin, and thanks to those of you who joined on time today. Hopefully more people shall be joining us. Today we'll be talking about using data, talked about strategies for collecting data, and actually I'm going to mute the lines here because we're getting some background noise, and I will unmute in a bit. A couple of you are on phone only, so you're currently muted. And I'll unmute as we get further into this. So as we get started here, talk a little bit about how to interpret the data that hopefully you're collecting. I'm going to share some of the information from the graphs that have data some of you have already submitted. Hopefully that will be useful. And we'll get into how you can use the data to interpret your results. Now, all I need to do is get my slides to advance. All right, if anybody cannot see the slides who's connected with a computer, please let me know. I know there are a couple of you with phone only. So our usual disclosures, we have nothing to disclose as far as financial conflicts of interest related to the activity, either for the planners or myself. Today I'm both speaker and moderator. Just the usual housekeeping reminders, the session is being recorded. There are folks who may not be able to attend today during the actual time, so we make the recordings available on SimpleQI. And by participating, you're consenting to be recorded, so thank you for participating. And just a reminder, please don't mention any patient identifiable information during today's session. We don't want to disclose that inappropriately. And if you have any questions at the end, you can send emails to Jake. His address is on the screen, and also my email address will be at the end of today's session. A few other things, reminder about mute. For those of you who are phone only, I've muted your line just because we were picking up background noise. You can unmute by pressing *6, and then you can always mute and unmute using either your phone or *6. And we've got the chat open, so if you're connected on computer, please feel free to use the chat to send messages. And for IT help, well, today that's me, so hopefully nobody will need any IT help. And just one reminder, if you do need to step away from the session, please don't put us on hold, because a lot of organizations have hold music that just takes over the call. It'd be better to disconnect and come back should that happen. So the objectives for today's session. So hopefully after today's session, you'll be able to look at your own data, look at the run charts, and really think about how you use that data to identify next steps, assess where you are, and think about what else you might need to do to achieve your goals. Today's session has been filed for CME accreditation, and that is pending, and there's a small evaluation that needs to be completed afterwards, and you should receive an email from Jake, probably close of business today, but due to a conflicting meeting, it's possible you might get it tomorrow. So if you don't see it till tomorrow, please do not be concerned. So our action from last month, I first would like to get a sense of who is here. I can see some names listed and a couple of phone numbers, but I don't know who's who. So I'm just gonna call out the various practices and you can let me know if you're here, please. Family Medicine at Monument Square. Anybody here? Freehold Family Health Center. Happy Healthy You. Okay. So I just saw your text into chat, but I don't know you're here, which one you were responding to. If you could kindly put that in. Thank you very much. Freehold. All right. Happy Healthy You. Palisades. RWJ Medical Associates. Okay, Happy Healthy You, got that one. St. Francis. Oh, I gotta mute this connection here. And Virtua Mansfield. And great, RWJ. And how about Capital? Which I apologize, your name is not on the list. All right, so we've got a couple of folks who are phone only. I'm going to unmute your lines. I'm going to unmute the 856 number first. It's 856 881-5111. Your line's unmuted. Could you tell me which practice you're here from, please? All right, let me try the second phone line, which is ending in 6307. Hi, who's on the line from 6307?
Hi, this is Aksan from Palisades Medical Center.
Great, thank you. And if you'd like to read and control it, use *6.
Okay, thank you.
That way, if you want to speak, you won't be stuck because I've muted your line. All right, great. Well, thanks so much for joining, folks. So last time we talked about collecting data during test cycles and making sure that we're keeping it simple, getting just enough data to inform our learning, and use that data to determine what we do next. So really curious as to who was able to do that. If you did a test, what were you hoping to learn during that test, and what data did you collect in order to assess your learning? And you can either call out or you can type into chat. Anybody test and collect some data since our session in January? All right, anybody run into particular obstacles that prevented you from being able to test? Perhaps you had something in mind and for some reason ran into a challenge in trying to conduct a test. It would be great to know what that might have been. So everybody's very quiet today. This is going to be a quiet call if we don't start hearing from us. With some of the other slides I have, we're definitely going to have some interaction because I'm going to show you some graphs and ask for your interpretation of them. So let me go to the next slide because I'm getting the sense that maybe nobody tested anything, which hopefully is not the case, or maybe you just don't have the information at your fingertips. Yesterday on the clinic that we had about HPV, we concluded that session with a request for everyone to take a look at some of your own run charts. And many of you have run charts now, not everybody. And for those of you who do, what run chart did you look at? What does the data seem to be indicating? Usually we look to data in improvement work to tell us a story about what's happening. And then I'll come to the final question and ask all of you. So let me see if we can get some volunteers who, after yesterday's session, took a look at their own data and what does it seem to be telling you? Let me start, and I'm just going to go in alphabetical order here. Freehold Family Health Center, were you able to take a look at your data since yesterday? Love to hear from you over the phone. If you prefer to type in chat, you can do so. Please send to everybody. All right, how about, oh, wait, here we go. All right, so we've got a note from Tom working on validating data and difficulty running reports on, don't know what NG, next gen, thank you. I was about to ask what does NG stand for. So that can be a challenge. I know other practices have run into being able to get data out of electronic health records, depending on the vendor and how they have it set up. That would be a great opportunity to think about using small samples of real-time data collection. Don't wait for the electronic system. Sometimes, especially for quality improvement work, all you need is a few small data points collected real time from folks who are being seen in the office today, for example. You don't need data for the entire month in order to be able to create a run chart or work on improvements. In fact, Michael Weinstein and I visited the RWJ Medical folks just last week to talk about some strategies for real-time data collection due to lag in getting the data from the electronic medical records as well. So if anybody's interested in that, I'm always happy to chat with you outside of these sessions on strategies on how to do that, some of which we talked about last month. So thanks for sharing that, Freehold. How about Happy Healthy You? You've got run charts because you've been putting data in quite consistently, which is just fantastic. Have you looked at your run charts and tried to determine what they may be indicating to you yet? I know Leah and Jamie are both on. Although it looks like they may have lost their audio. So let me skip on over to Robert Wood Johnson Medical. And I think it might be Heather who's on. I can't tell from the name. Now we just lost that connection, I think. So let me go to Virtua. So I'm going to unmute, I think, T. Oh, your line's unmuted. Can you hear me? Teresa? I can hear you, I think. I'm hearing some background noise. All right, I'm going to remute the line. Let me do one more try. Palisades. Anybody from Palisades? Another group that's been putting in data very consistently?
Yeah, Aksa here from Palisades. So I presented yesterday on HPV as well. So I would just like to say that we have been making sure that we are counseling each and every patient about the vaccination, and even on repeated visits, if they deny on the first time, we make sure that we counsel them again and again. And we have definitely noted some improvement in our numbers. So yeah, hoping to continue that.
Okay, great. Yes, we did call on you for yesterday's session. Appreciate you speaking again. I've actually got one of your charts in here for later on, so we'll come back to that in a moment. And I do thanks, Leah, for the response in the chat. So let me take us into the next session. So I love this cartoon because like to think about data in some fun ways as well. It's not always boring statistics, but I came across this one where it says 86.4% of people will believe any data you put in a PowerPoint slide, even if you just totally made it up to prove your point. And sadly, that can be true sometimes. So one of the things that's important with data when you look at it is to really understand what's behind the data. And so if somebody throws something up in front of a room for you, asking questions and really getting behind what is the data telling us, what does this represent, and making sure that the data is being shown in a way that's really useful. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples of that. So hopefully you will not feel that after today's session, you'll believe all of the data I've shown you and think that it was just made up, because it's not. So displaying data well is important. This is an example of data that is not displayed well. Looking at this slide, which I did not create, you can see the source where I found it, it just makes my head hurt. And it makes me cringe. We've got multiple colors, we've got bar graphs, we've got line graphs, we've got numbers all over the place. We've got two different vertical axes, one with numbers in thousands and the other one with percentages. And I don't even know how to make heads or tails out of this particular graph. This is what we would call bad display of data. It's important to think about that because run charts are one way to display data. They're not the only way to display data, but when you take your data and you start to display it, and hopefully all of you are thinking ahead to poster presentations for the NJAFP conference in June, you want to display the data in a way that it's understandable for people and tells the story you want to convey. So don't use a graph like this would be my takeaway. All right, so what if I showed you a graph that looks like this. And for folks who are phone only, apologies if this is a little difficult to understand, but this is a very visual presentation. The slides will be on Simple QI afterwards, as will the recording of this. But for those of you who can see it, if I showed you this graph and said, this is my commute time to work in minutes, tracked over 18 days, what would be your response? And you can call it out or you can type it into the chat. But what do you think of this graph? Anybody have any thoughts on the graph that I'm showing? And I'd love to hear from some folks verbally. Anybody have a commute that looks like this? Who works outside of the home? This is the quietest group I've ever shown this graph to. So I'll keep us moving. Maybe everybody's eating lunch listening to this.
So it seems like it has been always exactly the same, which is kind of, I don't know, I think it's unusual for sometimes it depends to track and something.
Do you believe?
I would say it's hard to believe, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Why is it hard to believe? Because we know the world doesn't work this way. Those of you who take care of patients, a graph of patient temperature would not look like this. You could take a patient's temperature, like in the hospital setting, every day, and if the person who's healthy, their temperature chart would not look like this, because we know that this is not the way the world works. And I'm just going to remute your phone line because we're a little background noise, unless you can mute yourself by *6. So if I showed you this, you would probably believe this, because this is what reality looks like. We all know that everything has some variation in it. When we see a graph where everything's exactly the same, there could be two causes. One is the data is not real. And the second is we could be displaying the data in such a way that you can't see the variation. So if I made the axis on this graph going from 14 to 16, it would look closer to a flat line because you wouldn't be able to see all the variation in there. So it's important to understand that data, when you look at it over time, and I'm emphasizing this in a big way very deliberately, that's what we have to do to assess improvement, is look at it over time. There's going to be a certain amount of variation. That's normal. We can't get all variation out. But when we look at the data, you don't have to be a statistician to look at the previous graph, this one, and say, that can't be right. I don't need a degree in statistics to know that that can't be right. So here's another graph. This is actually real data from a hospital.
Virtua Health offers solutions designed specifically for women, including primary.
Sorry about that, folks. Somebody put us on hold and we got their hold music. So this is actual data from a hospital that was doing cabbages for the non-clinical people. That's open heart bypass graft surgery. And they implemented a new protocol. And you can see they looked at data. The data for year 1 showed a 5% mortality. And after they implemented the protocol, the mortality in year 2 was 4%. So this slide was created that concluding that the protocol was a success. We had a 20% drop in mortality. What are your thoughts about the graph and the conclusion? If you were the quality improvement committee and I came to you and put this up at the front of the room and said, we implemented this protocol, we're really happy the protocol was a success, would you be congratulating me or questioning me? Or, I see, so Tom Wall or the folks at Freehold wrote misleading representation of effect. I'd love for you to elaborate on that a bit. Why do you think that is misleading? So I think you're headed towards the key point that I was hoping to come out of this. I'll give you a moment to type. Okay, so one piece of this, making the reduction look out of proportion by manipulating the vertical axis. So yeah, you can make things look much more dramatic than they actually are by making the scale of the graph either really small or really large. Any other thoughts? And keep in mind the graph that I showed you a moment ago. We go back for a moment, looking at data on a daily basis. Any thoughts on the average of year 1 compared to the average of year 2? Because that's what we're looking at here. So the challenge with looking at the average of year 1 and the average of year 2 is we have no idea what the variation within each year looked like. We've taken the entire year and averaged it up, and so now we've got a before and an after. Before and after is the worst way to look at improvement data that there is, and let me show you why. Because here's what the data looked like on a monthly basis. So here's 2 months. Year 1 is in this section over here. Hopefully you're seeing my mouse moving. To the left of the red line where it says protocol implemented. And you can see the mortality was 9% in month 1 and then steadily dropped all year long down to just about 1.5% at the end of year 1. And then the protocol was implemented. And look at what happened in year 2. Month to month, the mortality crept back up. But if I take the average for all of year 1, I get 5. And if I take the average for all of year 2, I get 4. So somebody's concluding that we've reduced mortality. Well, the average did go down, but when we look at this over time, the protocol did not result in any improvement at all. It may have had no impact whatsoever, or maybe even had a negative impact. So if we lump all of the data together into a before or after, then we end up getting misleading data. And in addition, as to what Tom wrote in the chat, you can also manipulate the vertical axis. You can see the vertical axis here goes from 1 to 9 to capture all of the months in between. So my takeaway message from this slide is, please do not make before and after graphs when you're trying to demonstrate improvement, because it hides too much. Now, sometimes people do that deliberately, but most of the time it's done because people are putting graphs together that don't appreciate that it's not telling the true story. So this slide tells the story of what really happened. This one really did not. And so that's misleading information. So here's another view of the same thing, just to make the point. This actually comes from a paper. It's a very short paper published by a couple of my colleagues, Rocco Perla and Sandy Murray. And I posted a PDF of the paper into Simple QI, and it's about run charts and how to interpret the data. And these graphs actually come directly from the paper. So on the right-hand side, you see 3 run charts of data over time, monthly data going from the beginning of the year till the end of the year. And you've got 3 different units. So you can see each unit was measuring cycle time in minutes, and each unit made a change around the month of June. Well, if you look at unit 1, you can see that the data was in a different place before the change, and all of the data after the change has shifted down. It's lower. So we would look at that and we would say, something different's going on here. We can't say definitively that the change caused the data to move, because other things could have happened. This is not a research study. This is looking at quality improvement data, so we have to be careful about cause and effect. But if we look at unit 2, we can pretty reasonably say that the change may not have had much impact at all, because the data was already trending down before we made the change. Possibly it enhanced what we were seeing, but did not necessarily cause the whole thing. And if we look at unit 3, we would probably conclude that the change, similar to what we saw with the CABBAGE protocol, really had little to no impact at all. We look at the data. But if I did a before and after average for all 3 units, it would look like the graph on the left for all 3. The average of the first 6 months for unit 1, unit 2, and unit 3 is 70, and the average for the second 6 months for all 3 is 35. So again, the before and after doesn't really tell you what's going on. But if you take the data and you look at it over time, monthly, weekly, depending on what it is you're measuring, it tells a very different story. It tells you so much more. So we really want to look at data over time, which is why the Simple QI website is designed to produce run charts. So run charts, very quickly. Some of you are already familiar with them. Some of you may not be, so I'm going to try and gear this towards the middle. I love run charts. They are a very simple visual tool, and they help us understand whether or not changes are leading to improvement. They help us find signals. The horizontal axis is always over time. It's usually a time element, as you just saw, months, it can be weeks, it can be days. It can also be sequential events. So you could make every procedure a data point, or make every patient, as long as they're in the sequence that they're being done. So if you wanted to do it by patient and you were doing patients coming to your practice, you would do it by arrival. The center line on a run chart is the median. We don't use the average because, as everybody knows, averages can be really heavily impacted by outliers or extreme values. So the median is the line, and it gives us the number at which half of the data points are above and half are below. And that median is then used for a few very simple rules to help us determine, is this just normal random variation that occurs with any system, or is something different happening here? It's really helpful to add goal lines if you're working on an improvement project, and annotating graphs, making note of where changes are made or things that impacted the data can be really helpful. So here's what a run chart looks like. Again, you can see data over time on the bottom. So going from left to right, we're looking at time or sequence. The measure can be whatever it is. I borrowed this chart from Marco Prola, and this was a project he worked on around red bag waste in a hospital, and they tracked it over time. And you can see the median is 4.6, and that's where we draw through. Excel can calculate the median for you really easily. I do it all the time, and I'm happy to show anybody who's interested in learning how to do that. But if we were to count the data points, and feel free to go ahead and do it yourself, you would count that exactly half of them are below that median line and half are above. The median line will always land there. Now, if you have data where there's not a lot of variation, and the variation in this graph is fairly stable, then you would see the average would be very close to the median or exactly the same. But if we had a lot of outlier data points, then you would see the average drawn up or down, whereas the median would stay in the same place. But often the average is very similar. So the rules for interpreting, there are just 4. I'm only going to ask you to think about remembering 3, because rule number 3 is a kind of a complicated one, and it requires somebody to really sit down and do a bit of checking, and I haven't used it much myself, but it's a good tool. The 2 that you need to know the most are shift and trend, and the rule number 4, the astronomical data point, is kind of an obvious one. But what we're looking for is a shift is 6 or more consecutive points above or below the median. And a trend is 5 or more consecutive points, all going up or all going down. So let me show you what they look like. So here's rule 1, a shift. 6 or more on one side of the median or the other. What that tells us is something different is happening here compared to the system before. So if you have baseline data and you figure out a median for the baseline data, and then you draw that median out, if you see something like this happen with your data, that's a signal that something different is happening. It could be that a change you've made is impacting the system, and now you're seeing the results. Or it could be that something else is happening that had nothing to do with what you're doing, but it's impacting the results. And so you need to dig down and find out what's going on. But it's really important that there are 6 or more. So you can see in between those 2 circles, and again, I hope you can see my mouse, we've got 2 data points here that are below the median, a third one over here with 1 right on in between. This is not a shift. It's gotta be 6 or more. Same thing for a trend. 5 or more going consecutively up, or 5 or more going consecutively down. I cannot tell you how many times I have sat through presentations by folks who really were trying very hard to give a great presentation and show the effects of improvement, and would call something like this, these 2 data points here, 10 and 11, a trend, that the data's getting better. And my heart breaks for them when that happens, because 2 data points does not make a trend. It's got to be 5 or more consecutively going up or consecutively going down. So if you have data points that start to go up like they do here, and then it dips back down, well, now we're back into normal variation. It is not a trend. It is so important to resist the urge to call something improvement when it's not. We all do it all the time. Before I learned all this stuff, I did it myself. It's very easy to do. It's very tempting to do. And it's so important that we not do it. Rule number 3, which I am not going to explain in detail because it's kind of complicated and we have limited time, is basically looking at how many times does the data cross the median line. If you remember back to my commuting graph, the data bounced all around, and even the red bag waste one, the data was bouncing back and forth on either side of the median. You can see here that the data only crosses the line 1 time. And there's a table for determining how many times the data should cross the line if it's just normal variation or if something different is going on, if there's a signal of something different. So this particular chart has 10 data points, and I know from the table that if the data crosses the line less than 3 times or more than 9 times, that's a signal something different is going on here. And the data only cross the line once. We have 2 runs. Each place where the data crosses the line is a run. So we would look at this and say, yeah, no, something different's going on here. We need to dig into this. And then the astronomical data point is kind of an obvious one. Again, you don't need to be a statistician. This one is kind of like, duh. You look at it and you go, whoa, what happened there? We all know how to do that. And so that's another signal that something different is going on. So now let's look at a couple of your run charts and some of the aggregate from the ECHO project in particular. And I'm gonna forewarn you, I'm gonna be looking for some folks to respond to this over the phone, over your microphone, or in chat. So here is the data that we have to date for all practices who've been reporting influenza data. And you can see this runs June of last year through last month, January. And the bottom row shows you how many practices have reported. And so this is the aggregate. And you can see the median, which is noted in blue up at the top, 45.91, and the median line is just automatically drawn. So when you look at this data, keeping in mind what I just told you about run charts, what do you think? Is the data improving, getting worse, staying the same? Have questions?
So around winter time, summer, it went down, but then it improved, which means, of course, we started giving the vaccine in October, November, but then it slightly decreased, but it's not that significant. It seems like just a slight decrease, and I would say kind of maybe a stable even.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you. So a couple of key points on this. First is that make sure you look at the number of teams reporting in that bottom row. The first data point from June is 1 practice, and July and August are both from 2 practices. If you could please remute, that would be great. we're getting some feedback. And then you can see starting in September, it goes up to 4, and then we have October forward. So we don't have the same number of practices reporting each month. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. The first 3 data points probably need to be looked at very carefully and possibly even excluded. And I'm going to start to mute your line because we're still getting some feedback there. So that's an important point to think about. We don't have the same information month to month. So I feel much more confident with the data from September and October forward because the 3 months prior, while the data may be fine, I probably wouldn't use it for analysis since it has so few people reporting. The other thing to really be careful of is when do you call it improvement versus decrease. So we can see that the data from September to October went up. We also went from 4 practices to 6, so we need to keep that in mind, but we can see how many patients are involved as well. So the denominators and the numerators probably reflect, as was just mentioned, that that's the season. That's when people start getting the flu shot. So we would expect to see that kind of a jump from September to October, but we wouldn't want to call September to October too much of an improvement. We got to be careful there because it's 1 data point. And it jumped up, but you can also then see December and January are a little bit lower. And is that a decrease? Not really, because we would expect a certain amount of random variation. So it kind of tells me that from October to January, the numbers are fairly stable. If we just look at October through January, the fluctuations aren't significant enough to be called improvement or decreases yet, but hopefully that'll change over time. Now here's the data from St. Francis, and I know nobody from St. Francis was on, but what do others think? I pulled out their data specifically. So this is 1 practice. What do you think about their data? Is there anything significant in what you see with their data here? Do they have a trend? Maybe folks who are on computers could just type in your quick thoughts of a 1-word answer, yes, no, not sure, into the chat. Because I'm going to move us along so that we wrap up on time. What do you think? Is this a trend? Hopefully somebody's brave enough to throw an answer out there and okay with having an answer that you're not even sure might be right. Anybody? Great. Thank you, Tom, or the folks at Freehold, because I'm not sure if there's more than one of you on the line. This is not a trend. It's very tempting when you first look at it to almost think, oh, look, we're getting better. But I would not want to see somebody take this graph and get up in front of a room and present to a board or a quality committee or at a conference and say, we're improving, because we don't have 5 consecutively increasing points. Because August is higher than July, but then you can see in September it came back down and then it went up 3 more. Now this could be the start of a trend depending on what happens with their January and February data, and that would be awesome if that turns out to be the case. But right now, this is just normal variation. So it's very important to make sure you really look at these so that you are interpreting correctly. So let's take a quick look at one other vaccine. So here is HPV for all practices that are reporting. Not everybody is. Not everybody's working on this. What does this data tell us? And maybe the Palisades folks want to speak to this because I've got your graph next. But what do you think when you see all of the data together? Are they still on? I'm not sure. Perhaps not. So similar to the other graphs, first of all, if we look at July and August, that's 1 practice only. So wouldn't want to compare the data points because the rest, September has 3 and you can see the others have 4. So If I were presenting this at a conference or something like that, I would cut July and August out. I'm showing it to all of you because you can see all of this on Simple QI and obviously to reinforce the points that we're talking about. But if I look at September through January, again, some people would gravitate towards saying, oh, it's getting better, and looking at the data. And yes, we do have three increasing data points. Go November, December, and January. We've got 3 going up, but it's not 5. So please do not call it a trend. We'll hope that February and March continue in that direction. That would be great. So we're being optimistic, but it's not a trend yet. And then here's the Palisades data. Again, they've got monthly data from September through January, which is fantastic. And as you can see, we've got 5 data points. So since we only have 5 data points, we really don't have enough yet to be able to apply the run chart rules unless all 5 were going up. So we have to wait for a little bit more data before we can analyze this. But right now, we've got the last 2 data points are on the other side of the median. We would need 4 more above that median of 20 to say we've got a shift in the data. Something else is going on here. Is it due to the work that Palisades is doing? Maybe. You can't make that determination from the run chart. All you can make is the determination that there's a signal that the data is a little different. So some tips on using run charts. Please do use the rules and count the data points. It will help you in not falling into the trap of tampering, which I have seen many people do with really good intentions. And tampering happens when the graph is misinterpreted, where we think improvement is happening, we call something a trend, but it's really not, or the data is giving us a signal that something's going on and we miss it. We don't realize it, and that can be because of things like axis manipulation as well. If you want to know sooner, track your data more frequently. You can track data weekly, or as I mentioned at the beginning, you can do each patient as a data point. Remember that for improvement, small samples are okay. You don't need data for every patient. What I like about run charts is you can do them on paper. If you get a piece of paper, a ruler, and a pencil, you can draw a run chart. And you could take the data that you might be collecting for the ECHO project, draw a run chart, put it up on a wall somewhere, and just people could put in data points at the end of every day. Or if you're doing every patient, somebody could just draw it into the run chart. And if you did that for every patient at the end of the day, you'd have a run chart. So you don't have to use sophisticated technology, and you don't have to wait for the data from the electronic records. In fact, it's even better to use real-time data, because then you can make changes, see the results of it, see the impact, and when you get your download from the electronic health record at the end of the month, you'll hopefully be seeing improvement, because once you get the download for the month is over, and as you know, you can't do anything with it. So again, here are the 4 rules. A shift is 6 or more, a trend is 5 or more. We look at, does the data cross the line too many times or too few, or do we have astronomical data points? And again, the paper with the citation is available in full PDF on the Simple QI website. So before we wrap up, I want to thank those of you who are submitting data regularly. Happy Healthy You, Palisades, and Virtua have been putting in monthly data through January, so thank you so much for that. Capital Health and RWJ, we now have data for you through January, so thank you to you as well. And also for the first 3, Happy Healthy You, Palisades, and Virtua, we got a team narrative this month, really brief, but loaded with useful information for us. It's just a goldmine of information that's really helping us with planning. So we're hoping that in the next few months, all of you will do this when you submit your data, include the brief team narrative. It's located under status reports. Contact me if you can't find it. We're not looking for a book. Just a couple of sentences can tell a great story about what you're learning, and it's easier to use than the PDSA form on the site. Here's what it looks like. You can see there are these little boxes, and all you need to do is put a sentence in each box. Each one is required the way the site was designed, so just put in NA if you don't have anything. And you'll see that self-assessment field, which I have the drop-down menu displaying on the right. We're not really using that scale, so you can pick any number you want. If you really want to pick a number that might apply, that's great, but just pick any. You can click 0.5 if you want every time. It doesn't matter because we're not using the scale. So, action items as we wrap up. please, and I'm going to ask a question here. For all of you thought about, hopefully, aims and goals back when you started this project. Think about how confident are you that you're going to achieve the goals you set by June. We are just past the middle of February. This project officially ends in June, wraps up at the NJAFP conference. How confident are you feeling, based on your data, that you're going to achieve your goals by June? And if you're not feeling real confident, then think about what else might you need to do. And please do reach out if we can help you. So take a look at your aims and goals. Take a look at your data. And when we come back together on March 18th, we would very much like to hear from each of you. How confident are you that you're going to achieve your goals? What are your aims and goals? And what are you planning to do to achieve them over the next few months? A reminder to please post on Simple QI by March 10th, the team narrative, which is new that I was just showing you, and the updated monthly data through February. And as always, if you would like assistance or you have questions, I'm happy to email or do a Zoom call or a phone call with any practices. And sometimes we can even get in a site visit if you would like somebody to come to your practice. So with that, thank you for attending today. I hope you found this valuable. Please do consider reading that paper on run charts. It will really help you in using the data in effective ways. And if you don't have data on Simple QI yet, please do get it up there. The run chart gets created for you automatically. So it's the easiest way to create run charts that I know of. Take your data, plug it in, and boom, you got a run chart with the median. And actually the analysis tools that I was mentioning are built in. You can click on a little menu and it will tell you, is there a trend? Is there a shift? Are there too many or too few runs? It's all built in to the site. So I'll stay on for any remaining questions. I know that you all have to get back to your practices for the afternoon. So thank you so much for joining today and have a great day. And I'll stay on the line for any questions that people may have.